everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here because it's a wonderful thing to talk about science and to explore the many aspects of science in our lives, and that's really what I want to do. It's a really broad-ranging overview of how science and technology is changing not just our lives, but the lives of our children and our grandchildren, because as the late Carl Sagan said, an astronomer, it is suicide to live in a society dependent on science and technology where virtually no one knows anything about science and technology. And the fact that you're all here and the business you do obviously suggests that you're at the vanguard, you're at the forefront of really turning and exploiting and making the most of science and technology, not just in our current generation, but for generations to come. And that's what we're going to be looking at, which is the brain of the future. But because this is a very general talk, and because I assume that there's relatively few brain experts here, oh, am I wrong? Are you all kind of neurologists? I always fear that, you know, I'll start talking in a very basic way about the brain. It turns out everyone's a consultant brain surgeon or something like that. So if there are any neuroscientists lurking in the audience, please forgive me if I'm starting off in a very basic way, but I think it's really important just to grasp what we mean by the brain and how special the brain is compared to other bits of your body. And that's why I like this picture here, because it reminds me of when I was doing a brain dissection 1,000 years ago when I was an undergraduate. And what they do is they bring in these Tupperware pots containing human brains, and they're in formalin, and you're wearing surgical gloves therefore. But it's a remarkable experience to prise open the lid of the Tupperware pot. And you've got your gloves on and you roll your sleeves up and you put your hand in and then you bring out and hold, rather like in this picture. You hold a brain. Yeah? And I remember thinking when I did that, if I wasn't wearing gloves, say a bit of brain tissue got under my fingernail, yeah, would that be the bit that somebody loved with? Would it be a memory? Would it be a habit? And it is the most remarkable thought that this sludgy stuff that occupies the same universe as, I don't know, nasal hair or earwax or saliva, that nonetheless it does so much more than those things do. I mean, unless you're already dozed off, you are currently having an experience that no one else can share firsthand, however much you like or know the people sitting next to you, however artistic you are, however poetic or musical you are. No one can hack into your head and see the world as you are seeing it through your eyes. And nor can you show and share directly what you're feeling, the consciousness you have at the moment. And somehow that's all tied up with this sludgy stuff that could get under your fingernail. And similarly, the fact that you have this unique take on the world means that for the 100,000 years that we've stalked the planet, no one has a brain like yours, and nor will they ever again. They might have hearts like yours, and lungs like yours, and livers like yours, but why is the brain so special, and why does it make you so special? Because it is special, and that's why we worry about, on the left, is this our future? Is this what we're going to turn into? I think this is how people often think of scientists anyway, kind of dysfunctional nerds, you know, hell-bent on world domination and certainly having no emotion at all, just sort of grinning in this mechanical way. Is that really what we're going to be like? Okay, so let's start off then by looking at the three ages, if you like, of men and women, and starting off first with the small baby. And let's think about the developing brain and what the future will hold for that. Okay, so I don't know if there's any goldfish lovers here. Hands up anyone who has and loves goldfish. Ah, well, I hope I don't upset you too much. If I say, let's be brutal, goldfish don't have great personalities, do they? And yeah, perhaps yours is a genius goldfish, but on the whole, let me be even more brutal. If your kids had a goldfish and the goldfish sadly, finally passed away, you could go and buy another goldfish and the child would come home and they wouldn't know any difference. Now, you couldn't do that with pet cats or dogs, and much as they might want you to, you certainly couldn't do it with their brothers or sisters. And this is because we have shifted from the narrow dictates of our genes, from the stereotyped instincts, the very narrow repertoire of behavior that characterizes, let's say, the goldfish, through to something that we do brilliantly. We don't run particularly fast, we don't see particularly well, we're not particularly strong compared to other species in the animal kingdom, but what we do more than any other, and this is why we occupy more ecological niches than any other, is we learn. And the first point I really want to make about the human brain is it's our ability to adapt that distinguishes us more than any other mammal. Although they learn and adapt, we do it so brilliantly and so well that this really does give us huge advantages. So when you're born with pretty much all the brain cells you'll ever have. But even if you're a clone, that's to say an identical twin, you are going to be unique. And the reason is this. As you're growing, in the first 2 years of your life, you can see what happens. The brain of a baby is pretty much the same as that of a chimpanzee, but we undergo a huge growth postnatally. And the reason is, it is the growth of the connections between brain cells that accounts for the growth of the brain after birth. So you're born with pretty much all the cells you'll ever have, the blobby bits here, I'm sure you're familiar with pictures like this, but focus on the stringy bits, the connections between the brain cells, which even in the first 2 years of life you can see as astonishing. Now this means something special. It means that because this is happening after birth, and every single person will have different experiences, those unique experiences are going to shape and strengthen and figure the connections between your brain. And that's what's going to make you so special, so that no one will ever have a brain, indeed a mind like yours, ever again. Now, just to give you an example of what's called plasticity, this ability of the human brain to adapt, let me give you one example of this brilliant experiment involving 3 groups of adult volunteers, none of whom could play the piano. Now, if you ever volunteer for such an experiment, let me give you a word of advice. Try and not be in the control group, because they just stared at a piano for 5 days. I had a pretty boring time of it. A second group learned 5-finger piano exercises, and you're going to see the brain scans even over 5 days to see the plasticity, the change in the brain that's resulted even from 5 days of playing these piano exercises. But there was a third group equally inexperienced in playing the piano, and they're the most surprising and interesting of all, and I'm going to keep them as a surprise. So let's have a look at these 3 groups. As you can see, over a 5-day period, you're looking from left to right at brain scans. Look first at the controls. As you can see, nothing has happened. The brain is literally unimpressed by this. Now look at the second group, the physical practice, and you can see those who are actually playing 5-finger piano exercises, even over 5 days, there's been an astonishing change in the territory relating to their digits. But my surprise group that I hope you'll agree are the most exciting of all, these guys, they merely imagined they were playing the piano. Isn't that amazing? So you can see something very exciting. First of all, that people that talk about mind versus brain and mental versus physical, everything has a physical basis in some way. And what's very exciting, as far as the brain's concerned, the interesting and important issue here is not the contraction of the muscle for the playing of the piano. It is the thought that has preceded it. The man who developed the therapy that's still in use for Parkinson's disease, a disease of movement, he said a wonderful thing. He said, thinking is movement confined to the brain. Thinking is movement confined to the brain. You can see that's what a thought is. So you can see that neuroscience is starting to appreciate not just how the brain adapts to the environment, but actually how something as insubstantial as a thought that previously we thought the philosophers dealt with, really we can now get a handle on it scientifically. And it shows as your brain, let's hope you're awake still, what this is happening to your brain, you're thinking, let's hope. So things are changing in your brain every moment you're alive. Now, how does this work and what's happening? Well, in order to get down and dirty with the neurons, we have, I'm afraid, to go to rodents because not many people want to volunteer brain tissue to you. So we go to the rats, and this is a wonderful experiment where the rat is given a stimulating and exciting environment, a so-called enriched environment. Now, enriched for a rat doesn't mean to say they come here to the centre and have a science day and meet lots of hopefully interesting, exciting people and see and do lots of exciting things. Enrichment for a rat, and this is from my own lab, you can see how happy these rats look. Anyone who's expert on rats, clearly the rat's having a wonderful, wonderful time because rats are highly exploratory creatures, and as you can see here, they're having a lovely time interacting with each other and with lots of little branches and tubes and the like. So in this very simple experiment, what another group did was to actually look at the brain cells from each group of rats. Rats kept in ordinary condition and those in an enriched environment, and this is what they saw. So here we have a single brain cell from an animal that was in a standard environment. So here is isolated condition. And I don't know how familiar you are with this kind of thing, but the main blobby bit is the brain cell, and the branches coming out of it are what I want you to focus on. As we look at a brain cell, from an animal from the enriched condition. Otherwise, these animals were the same. They're from the same litters and so on, but the only difference is that they'd been exposed to an exciting, enriched, exciting for a rat, enriched environment. And look at the difference. The blobby bit's the same, the cell body, but can you see how many more branches there are in the animals from the enriched condition? So what's happened here and why is this important? Well, we all know that when you exercise your muscle gets strong and large, the more you make it work. Same thing is true in a way for the brain. The more you make brain cells work, what they do is they respond when they're active by growing more branches, so-called dendrites. Now, why is that interesting for a brain cell to have bigger branches? Well, think about it. When you do that, you're increasing the surface area of your brain cell. Why is that important? Well, the greater your surface area, the greater a target you are for other brain cells to make connections with you. So let's just recap. The more stimulating and exciting an environment, the more brain cells work hard, the more active they are. They will respond when they are active by growing branches, and these branches will enable them to make more connections. Now let's put that together and see what this might mean. Here on the top left, you have a beautifully injected fluorescence into a cell in the brain, and you can see those lovely branches that look just like a tree, and there is a schematic sort of tree on the right, fancifully showing on the extreme right how this would be a way of handling information. The more branches you have, the more connections you can make, and the more, I would say, you have a personal significance. That's to say you can see one thing in terms of something else. Something is significant to you that it won't be to someone else because you've got that connection. And when you're aware of that connection, I would suggest that's what we mean by understanding. So the more stimulated your brain, the more connections it has as you develop, that means you can see one thing in terms of something else from a personal perspective, the more you can understand it in a unique way. So let's think about that. You're born, in the words of a great psychologist in the 19th century, you're born in a booming, buzzing confusion. And when you're a little baby, all you can do, because you have no experiences, is to evaluate the world in terms of raw senses. How sweet, how fast, how bright, how cold. But you can imagine if your brain constantly has the same visual pattern coming in, accompanied by certain tones and colors and textures and voices, slowly you'll go from a sensory take on the world to what we call a cognitive one. That is to say, you'll understand one thing in terms of something else. And let's say this erstwhile visual mass of colors and shapes and textures ends up being your mum. And if your mum, as let's hope she does, features again and again and again in your life, she will have a significance to you that she has to no one else because of the associations that have been formed. So just to prove it, on the bottom right, you can see me there with some male colleagues, and I imagine, unless you know people well in Oxford, you will see these as generic middle-aged men, white middle-aged men in suits and ties, typical scientists, probably. You can see them. I know them as David and Martin and so on, because I know them well. They're my colleagues. I know how many kids they've got. I know what their wives are called. I know where they went on holiday. Just as you could substitute in your friends and family and colleagues, and I would see them as generic men and women, you see them as people who mean a lot to you, who have a significance to you by virtue of the associations that they trigger. So that's what happens as you grow. You're personalizing your brain from sensory to cognitive. So here you are living your life. This is downtown Oxford. Everyone